So the first fellow I'd like to introduce is Paul Dillinger. Paul is head of global product innovation at Levi Strauss, and that means exactly what it says. He is responsible for Levi Strauss innovation efforts. He's been at Levi for 3 years, but in the design world for 16 more. He was with companies you'll all recognize, Calvin Klein, DKNY. He shares his expertise not only with his colleagues, but he teaches design at WashU, Washington University in St. Louis, and at RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. And because I think it's always interesting to get a sense of people's journeys, I'm just going to tell you what the academic path has been for the first movers you're going to hear tonight. Paul received his Bachelor of Fine Arts in Fashion Design from Washington University, and then was, get this, the first Fulbright Scholar in Fashion Design, and studied in Italy, and while there got his Master of Fine Arts from the Domus Academy. So Paul, welcome.
It's an enormously humbling privilege. I asked Garrett to make sure he got a picture of me with the blue Aspen banner behind me for my mom, who is hugely impressed by this journey, and she, like me, can't really account for it. But thank you for letting me come up here and share this story. It's a story that I hope is reflective of all of our experiences of challenge and struggle and reward in this journey. My motivation is really critical. As Nancy mentioned, I spent 16 years slogging it through in the fashion industry in New York, doing well and enjoying it. There had been a period when I was at one large fashion house as head of denim design, and moved to American Eagle for about 5 years, and then moved back to a different premium design house, competitive with the first. I've been working in the industry for a while, and I realized after 5 years I was cutting the same fabric into the same fits, using the same finishes, selling them to the same mean buyers at the large retailers for exactly the same price points with higher margin expectations. And when you look deeper into that, you realize that you have 5 years later returned to the same point to be making product more cheaply and at a lower wage, and that there was real gouging happening at the factory level, and there was only one place for that value to be extracted. And I became extremely disillusioned, and I'm a creature of habit. I don't like change. I hate change, in fact. And I just couldn't do it anymore. And I came to this aha moment, this moment of change in my life, and I said, well, to hell with this. I'm going to go teach. If you're looking to escape the circle and the spiral bureaucracy of the fashion world and go for something less cumbersomely bureaucratic, it's not going to be found in academia necessarily. And worse yet was I had a tremendous pleasure of going back to my undergraduate alma mater to teach, and found that the class of the students that were of such extraordinary caliber, but were really professional grade getters at that point. And when you tried to explore motivation for why they were, in this case in the design field, that it really came from the Rachel Zoe project or from Project Runway, and I shouldn't name names, but really the most shallow, valueless reasons to go into a profession were the principal motivators for these students. It was really about the champagne runway culture that was motivating them. And so when I would ask them about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, one of the really pivotal moments in the American labor movement that happened at a women's or a shirt factory where so many immigrant laborers had died, and they knew nothing of it. So there'd been a deficiency in the history education somewhere along the line, and I was in this position of trying to create to create an educational framework for social value within the context of fashion education. And so when I got the call from Levi Strauss and Company, while I was teaching, they offered me this opportunity to continue to teach, which they supported and funded, but also to come and try to create change at Levi's. And that brings me to this opportunity in the First Movers program. The first step in this was really to identify the problems, and one of them is the race to the bottom that we all participate in, from the consumers through the manufacturers, the retailers certainly, and then also this the outsourcing of waste and the outsourcing of guilt. When the clothes are just too old for you to wear, which means they're probably not that old and totally wearable, we donate them to someone else. We give ourselves moral permission to go shop. And that seemed to be a problem. And another problem seems to be that we spend all this energy making, and we know in the making there's polluting, and yet we still want ever lower prices, and that there is this aversion to true cost at the cash register. And so I wanted to think of a way of reimagining the full system. When we think about efforts to create sustainable apparel, we often hear about marketing strategies around organic cotton. Never mind the potential that organic cotton may have been picked by child or bonded labor. We talk about process differences or energy savings or water savings. We hear a lot about single component calibration without regard for the fact that it's a massive system of components. And there was no real effort to collect all of the different areas of influence into one collective understanding and to try to create a design methodology that would tackle that. Now, one of the great humbling moments is whenever you try to tackle the full understanding of a system, you realize exactly how dumb you are. There's no way anyone could get the full thing, and I'll get into that a little later. But so my project for the Aspen First Movers Fellowship was to try to create this holistically sustainable design and development method that would be applied to a product category. And I was given permission by Levi's to actually put this into practice, with the premise that product platform would then be the foundation on which we could consider a new hypothetical business model, one that didn't require things like comparable store sales increases or sort of inventory management mechanisms that dump a product in order to hit quarterly numbers. We could imagine a new system that was free of a lot of the worst practices that drive this race to the bottom. And then third, if I could design this design method and this business model in such a way that components could be extracted, joined, and taught into a cross-disciplinary educational framework, that we could try to affect a new class of contributors coming up in the system. And so that's what I did. And all along the way, learned exactly how much I don't know. But a lot of learnings emerged that I think are pretty important to share. And I'd like to share the learnings before I actually share the project with you. First of all, it became really apparent that really design makes the problem. Someone said to me, "You seem awfully confident as a designer that you'll be able to solve this problem." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not terribly confident I can solve it, but I'm absolutely certain that I caused it. Absolutely certain that this is mine. This is my mess to clean up." And there's another great feature of being a designer, other than just being allowed to make messes, in that much like the fool in King Lear, the only one who speaks truth to the old blind king, the designer can say pretty much anything. I have permission in the boardroom to make sort of heretical claims about the death of capitalism and to say, what about not selling so very many things? What about selling fewer things? What about asking people to trade things? And, just all the incendiary anti-capitalist rhetoric that a designer is at liberty to throw around, that any responsible business professional would be axed immediately if they would. And that can be me. And I try hard to cultivate the professional personality that's allowed to do that. And I think I've done well with that. No one takes me seriously. And the other thing is to realize that once confronted with the truth, that fundamentally you have to assume that everyone out there operates with goodwill. I once had a buyer from a very large retailer once say to me, "You don't understand, Paul, our consumer just doesn't care about sustainability." And that's a really funny answer to a question I can't even imagine. Because if the question was, how do you like your water? Clean? Do you like your clean air that you're breathing? Do you enjoy persistent formaldehyde in the liver of your child, off gas from your pants? No, I don't think the answer is I don't like sustainability. I think the question was asked wrong. And if you start every conversation, every storytelling opportunity with things like, 25% of the pollution in the world coming from agriculture comes from a crop we don't eat. Why is that? Or, what year do you think it will be when the value of an acre yield of cotton from Pakistan will finally be worth less to Western consumption than that same acre yield of food will finally be worth to domestic consumption? Like, if you start asking questions like that and start exploring the topic, you win people over quickly, and that it becomes not just an idea of sustainability, but a moral imperative for sustainability. And once you can, the more people you can tell the story to, the more quickly you can create change and you can bring it along. And so the Aspen Institute First Movers Program and the emphasis on storytelling has been really a really critical a feature to the success of this program. The other thing that I say was successful, I think we learned it on our very first day here over at the Koch building, when Brian graphed out on 2 axes, forming 4 quadrants, is your project aligned with your company's capabilities, and is it aligned with your company's values? I think I was the only one that enjoyed the way up there in the corner. This is totally within my company's capabilities and totally aligned with my company's values. So the idea of innovating downhill. It's just easier to try not to swim upstream so much and to try to figure out the ways you can get the company working for you. I enjoy this process that says every 6 months we need new inputs and every 6 months we'll get new outputs. Why not make those inputs values guided? Why not say the inputs are just going to be us trying to do the right thing? And it puts a really different spin on the process. And also, you're going to get product out at the end. And if you can make the product that comes out at the end product that you're proud of, product that you can go to sleep at night having made, product that didn't pollute so very much, then you're going to be a happy person for it. So I think storytelling being the critical feature, I'm going to ask a friend of mine to come up here and I'm going to tell a couple stories about a couple pieces of clothes. What's more basic than a simple T-shirt and a pair of pants? To demonstrate a values-guided values-guided design and development strategy. So it's just a pair of pants. So we have to ask ourselves, with what is it made, where is it made, how was it made, and how often will it be made? This pair of pants was made using 100%, let me describe a cotton scenario for you. One that's not organic necessarily, but it's smart fertilization, smart pesticide deployment at the time of day using the right calibrated, decreased amount of water that's going to create as little runoff as possible at a field surrounded by box crops that catch all that effluence. This is the only cotton that we can say with certainty is certified not to have used any child or bonded labor. And you can't say that about a single other garment that any of y'all are wearing today, including the things I've got on. So there's something really important to be considered about the source of material. And what it took was Levi's combining forces with a lot of other companies, knowing that this type of statement is important and so far deep into the supply chain that no one feels that they have influence or visibility. But if enough like-minded companies come together in pre-competitive collaboration and say, let's form an alternative economy around values-guided cotton cultivation, that we have a chance to change some of the worst practices of the industry. Now, if you get all that together and make a 100% sort of values-guided cotton material here, and you use it in everything that you make, and you don't change it season after season, and you commit not only to the 60s 3-ply twill, but if you take that 60s yarn, which is a very fine yarn, and you apply it twice, you suddenly have a 60s 2-ply jersey. If you apply it once, a 60s single poplin. You've created a fully rationalized fiber strategy as well as a fabric strategy, as well as a garment strategy that reduces waste. Waste being pollution, yes, but waste also being cost. If you then send it to the mill to be woven into this fabric, but you don't dye it at the mill, because once again, the mill's too deep into the supply chain for us to have real visibility or control. You say, hold off on the color, because I can't tell if you're polluting or not. Let me take this to the factory where I have total control over whether or not the pollution's happening. And I worked closely with that factory to come up with a type of dyeing method that uses no salt, therefore doesn't require the desalination process, and saves 60% of the energy in the dyeing processes. And also happens at cold water levels. So not only are we not heating up the water, we're allowed to use about 30% less dye, and the discharge is clean water that comes out into the environment at the same temperature that went in. So a lot of the metrics around water discharge are around the particulate in the water. Very few people are considering what the warm microclimates around factories are actually doing, and we can confirm a neutral microclimate around the factory because of water output here. And the factory's in Bangladesh. Now, at our last convening at Greenleaf is right when the Rana collapse was happening, and we had this opportunity to steer clear of Bangladesh. But this particular garment is made at a factory in Bangladesh, where Levi's and the factory have carved out a portion of the cost of goods that is going into a fund that's managed by an in-country NGO that's delivered surveys to the factories that have said, what do you need in terms of community development? Past fair labor in the factory, past the medical services access in the factory, what do you need outside the factory to make this a better community to work in? The vote surprised us. The vote was for access to and education around financial literacy services for women. You don't really think about what happens when they get paid in cash, do you? And who that cash goes to when that cash is being paid in a country with challenging cultural context. And so for us to be able to give access to financial services for the very first time, to interest and to protection for the money that's being earned is a great reward for me to be able to say, I, as a designer, have participated in this. Now, the challenge is this is happening at one of 5 pilot factories within approximately 600 factory vendor base in Levi Strauss. Now, I, as a designer, want to participate in the value being generated at those 5 factories, but what do I, as a designer, have to do in order to accommodate the capabilities of those factories so that the work can be done in a place I know to be generating social value? And it takes social value and puts it as co-equal in the hierarchy against fashion and trend. And I personally, as a designer, would rather know that I'm delivering some sort of positive value to the community versus making sure I've got orange as the next black or whatever the scenario is for a given season. And then finally, the garment is designed to last. We're 3 seasons in and the garment style hasn't changed, the fit hasn't changed. The formulation that saves 60% of the energy and 30% of the water hasn't changed. The colors have changed a little, but most of the colors have remained the same. And we've created a merchandising scenario that supports sustained ownership, recognize that there's lasting value in quality product. And the only refinements we make are when we discover deficiency in the construction, we make it better. And so the garment's been designed, there are loops on the interior that will allow you to hang it up so it can be hung to dry. And if you do that, it's going to last you quite a bit longer than the average garment on the market today. Now, the t-shirt is my favorite because, again, we discussed the material strategy. It's made with a cold water pigment dye. And this was done at a factory that collects all the rainwater from the roofs of the factory to use in the garment dyeing process. And then what little heat is used in the process is generated from solar power. Traditionally, a t-shirt has a pocket on it, and the pocket's there just so it doesn't look like the t-shirt that's in your underwear drawer. The pockets are useless. Nobody puts anything in those pockets. It creates 2 substantive points of weaknesses right where the corners where that pocket is adhered. And so if you must have differentiation, because you must, well, there's your pocket. It's printed on. And most importantly, if anyone's ever tried to hang a wet t-shirt, if I'm putting in a label that says, I need you to wash this on cold and not dry it, if anyone's ever tried to hang that wet t-shirt, we know it drips out and you get those little points on those Romulan points on your shoulder. And so all it took was to simply take on the shoulder here, the 2 pieces overlapping at cross grain when wet, create a point of real strength where there was a point of weakness, allowing you to take this garment and hang it up and not put it in a dryer, substantively increasing the useful life of that garment and allowing you to keep it longer and save a lot of energy across the life of the garment. Because we know about 50% of the energy and more than 60% of the water used over the life cycle of garments is consumed after the garment's been purchased, and we have very little influence over that. But the best we can do is design to hopefully help people care for the garments longer and get greater value. And so thank you, Garrett, for modeling with us.